Today's video is a response to Dr. Sabeel Ahmed's lecture on atheism, presented to Muslim students at the Islamic Society of Northwest Suburbs. First, I want to fairly summarize his presentation. Dr. Sabeel argues that atheism is becoming more influential, especially among young people. He discusses why some Muslims lose their faith, pointing to exposure to biology, philosophy, social media, and unanswered questions about Islam. At the same time, he argues that Islam has convincing answers to every major objection. He explains different worldviews such as atheism, agnosticism, deism, and pantheism before defending the Islamic understanding of God. He argues that many criticisms of Islam arise from misunderstanding the religion rather than genuine problems with it. When people object to terrorism, he argues that Islam should not be blamed for the actions of bad Muslims. When people ask why good non-Muslims would go to hell, he argues that both correct belief and correct deeds are necessary for salvation. He also argues that Islam is no more restrictive than everyday life. Just as jobs, schools, and traffic laws require rules and discipline, Islam also provides rules that ultimately benefit human beings. A large part of the lecture focuses on the problem of suffering. Why does God allow childhood cancer? Why does he allow genocide? Why does he allow earthquakes, disease, and immense human suffering? Dr. Sabeel's answer is that Allah is not only all-powerful and all-loving, but also all-wise. He compares our perspective to a child receiving a painful vaccination. The child does not understand why the parents allow the pain, but the parents possess greater wisdom. Likewise, human beings may not understand why Allah permits suffering, but Allah has reasons that ultimately serve a greater purpose. He argues that suffering may function as a test, purification, punishment, a consequence of human free will, or a means of attaining greater reward in the afterlife. He also argues that religion is unfairly blamed for violence, pointing to atheistic governments under Stalin, Mao, and others as responsible for enormous human suffering. He defends Muhammad's military campaigns as primarily defensive and governed by ethical rules that prohibited intentionally harming civilians. Finally, he presents what he considers scientific evidence for God. His central argument is that information always comes from intelligence. Since DNA contains enormous amounts of information, he concludes that life points to an intelligent creator rather than an unguided natural process. Whether you agree or disagree with his conclusions, I think it's a fair summary of the lecture, but throughout the presentation I noticed one recurring theme. Whenever we reached the hardest questions, the answer eventually became the same. Trust Allah. Children dying of cancer? Trust Allah. Genocide? Trust Allah. Natural disasters? Trust Allah. Hell? Trust Allah. Muhammad's actions? Trust Allah. And that is the one idea I want to discuss. I do not trust Allah's wisdom. Not because I think I'm smarter than God, not because I claim to know everything, but because I am being asked to answer a question. Do I believe in Allah? Do I worship Allah? Do I organize my entire life around Allah? If that is the question being asked, then I have no choice but to evaluate Allah's character. I'm often told that human beings are too limited to judge God, but that's exactly backwards. You are asking me to judge whether I should believe in God. Evaluation requires judgment. Imagine a doctor whose treatment caused a child to die. The parents ask why. The doctor replies, "I'm wiser than you, trust me." Would anyone accept that as an explanation? Imagine a government that imprisoned thousands of innocent people. Citizens ask why. The government replies, "We have reasons beyond your understanding." Would anyone call that accountability? Of course not. We would expect explanations, not because we think we know more than the doctor or the government, but because extraordinary actions require extraordinary justification. Now apply that same principle to God. If someone tells me that a perfectly good God allows a 2-year-old to die slowly from bone cancer, my first question is simple. Why? Not because I'm arrogant, not because I think I know better than God, because I am being asked to conclude that this being is perfectly good. If the answer is simply, Allah knows best, then nothing actually has been explained. The question remains exactly where it was. For me, the problem is even deeper. I don't merely think I haven't heard a satisfying explanation. I don't believe there is one. I cannot imagine a morally sufficient reason for a 2-year-old to spend months dying in agony from bone cancer. Likewise, I cannot imagine a morally sufficient reason for eternal hell. Finite human mistakes do not justify infinite conscious torment. These are not minor questions. They are among the biggest questions any worldview must answer. Now let me explain why this matters so much to me. Ironically, the problem of suffering is not even my biggest objection to Islam. My biggest objection is Muhammad's moral character. When I study Muhammad's life, I encounter practices like concubinage and sexual access to female captives after war. I don't see the highest moral example humanity has ever known. I see actions that I believe are objectively wrong. Again, don't tell me Allah knows best. Tell me why. If a perfectly good God permitted these things, then explain the moral reasoning. Lay it out, then allow me to evaluate it honestly. That's what any sincere seeker of truth should do. If Allah exists, I don't think He would ask human beings to switch off their conscience. I think He would engage it. He would explain Himself. He would explain why horrific suffering exists. He would explain why hell is just. He would explain why Muhammad was permitted to do what he did. And then each of us could decide whether those explanations are morally convincing. Some people might be convinced. Some might not. But at least there would be an explanation. Instead, I'm repeatedly told to trust first and answer and understand later. I cannot do that. Not when the questions involve children suffering, not when they involve eternal punishment, not when they involve practices that I believe violate basic human dignity. For me, trust Allah is not an answer. It's the very question we are trying to answer. If Allah wants my belief, if Allah wants my worship, if Allah wants my life, then I think He owes humanity something more than trust me. I think He owes us an explanation, and until that explanation comes, I cannot honestly say that I trust Allah's wisdom.